Very good. I'm very pleased to have Karen Henchey with us this afternoon. And Karen, to begin with, I'm going to ask you some kind of demographic and background questions just for context,
Sure.
to kind of identify, where you've been and your experience in Quebec, where you come from and your background. Then we'll get into some of the more, I guess, relevant questions, for lack of a better word.
Sounds
So
good.
the first question is, where were your parents born?
So they were both born in Montreal.
Okay.
Yes, they came from, I guess, Irish stock way back, but they were both Montreal folks. And I was also born in Montreal. So we go back a few generations.
Okay.
Yes.
And where did you receive your education, your elementary, secondary, and any post-secondary?
Yes, so I didn't travel. So we had a house in Lachine since I was about, I think, 18 months old. My mom keeps reminding me I was not very old when we got it, and she still has this house. So I went to Resurrection of Our Lord Elementary, and then Bishop Wayland High School. And then I went off to Marianopolis College in Montreal, and then McGill. So all pretty much in a close proximity from Lachine, a little bit east to Montreal, and that's it.
Okay. Now, what is or was your occupation?
Well, it currently is, I'm the communications officer at the Quebec Federation of Home and School Associations. It's a job I've had, I guess, for, gosh, it's been a pandemic job. So just at the beginning of the pandemic. So
Mhm.
before that, I worked in the nonprofit sector. And way before that, I worked for a publisher of English as a second language textbooks. So kind
Okay.
of goes back here, there, and everywhere.
And where do you live now?
Point Claire.
Okay. My old neck of the woods.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to get into kind of the more relevant questions now.
Okay.
So I'm going to start off by asking you, what is the best thing in your experience about living in Quebec?
I think the best thing is that I'm surrounded by family. I think that's my real, what's really keeping me in Quebec is we have, I was born into a pretty big family, and all of my siblings, my 5 siblings, are still in the Montreal area. So that's the best thing for me.
Okay.
Mhm.
And sometimes this question is, people find it difficult to answer, and I can understand why I would find it difficult too, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Describe your relationship to Quebec in a single word.
I've thought about that. And honestly, the first word that comes to mind is complicated, because it is complicated. I'm really kind of, anyway, I'm going to blather on, but
No, go ahead, please, blather.
okay. Complicated in the sense that, it's my home. It's been my parents' home. It's been their parents' home. But, and then on a personal level, I've met some wonderful people in my days as a Quebecer. And one-on-one, I've had wonderful relationships with my Francophone brother-in-law, with actually the lady at the swimming pool, that you do that thing, where I know she's Francophone, so I speak to her in French. She politely speaks to me in English, and then I forget sometimes, so then I start in English. And then, that kind of cordial thing about living in Quebec. People that you meet, sweethearts. However, when I think, when I read the Gazette, the local newspaper, and I'm too much on social media, I think, oh my goodness, what kind of a province do I live in? They don't even want me here anymore, even though I've got this history. And I look at my own kids, and there's one that's just moved back to Quebec because both she and her husband work remotely permanently. But the other two, they're not coming back, I don't think, and my husband said that years ago. I don't think our kids are going to stay here. And that's really bothered me. And that's made the relationship, I think, complicated. The fact that somehow or other, though I was this kid that was born here and grew up here, that I'm another person that's not fitting into the overall wishes of this government, in terms of, I don't know why, but the idea that we are somehow we may be in the way of this preservation that they want to do, this hanging on and holding on and continuing this, the strength of the French character within of course, an overwhelming English North America, but I just feel like, oh my goodness, it's like I'm gone to a party and they don't really want me there. That little feeling. And if I go on to more, I mean, where I grew up the street, the local swimming pool, like we just, all the kids went there every afternoon, and it was called the Western Lachine Swimming Club, WLSC. That was it. And so I still pass this pool, like, you know, a couple of times a week to visit with my mom, but they've erased the WLSC. Like, it's like it's no longer a name that they necessarily want identified with this, of course, much more Francophone pool now. But I thought, oh, that were my memories, you know, those were all those days that, you know, those lost youth days, you know, where you spend all your time at the local community. So anyway, that just that kind of erasure feeling, you know, where you're like, oh, darn, you know.
Okay, the next question is kind of interesting. Where do you feel most at home in Quebec? For example, in communities based on language or culture, profession, or a geographic location?
I think I would say geographic. I think it's the West Island of Montreal, because I've only lived in this area, and it's where most of my siblings live, and all of our life experiences have been here. So that would be home to me, and that's where therefore I'm most comfortable.
Okay, fair enough. Now, the next question, it's a two-part question, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it before I ask you the question, because some people have found the second part a little difficult, and I understand why. I talk about the official definition of Quebec. Now, when I say official, it doesn't necessarily mean, it can mean the government, but it can also mean the official definition that you grew up with, that you're comfortable with your peers, however you perceive the official definition of Quebec. So I'll just go ahead and ask the two-part question, and you can answer as you see fit. How would you define a Quebecer is the first part. And do you think the official definition in Quebec includes you?
Okay. So my definition would be anybody who lives in this province. So that's it. The second part, I'm thinking, I mean, I've looked on the Quebec website, and I think they say similar things, you know, like anyone who lives in this province. I would feel that in some ways I align with it. Although I think when they say Quebec Nation, I don't know if I'm supposed to be in that, you know, like whether the Quebec Nation is the Francophone community of Quebec. And again, like maybe they need a kind of paragraph or a little parentheses just to make sure people like me understand, you know, although I've heard, you know, comments that of course, you know, of course you're part of this community, but I wouldn't mind seeing it somewhere, you know, that that this includes ... you know, because I think that's it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Now, another interesting question. Has your sense of identity as a Quebecer changed over the years? And if so, in what ways?
Okay, I would say I started out pretty oblivious. This was my home. This is where you know, I was growing up. I was surrounded by a community. So I had no questions in my mind. As I grew older, I think just because, you know, I was a teen when I started realizing, you know, there were rumblings of neighbors leaving. And then that got me worried. I thought, oh, you know, families that we socialized with were going, and are we supposed to go? You know, so it was, I think that's where this whole complicated thing started, because I started to think, oh, wait a minute, maybe they're right. We're supposed to leave, you know, but of course we didn't leave. So I do believe it's my, you know, as time has gone on, I've definitely been the oblivious kid to, oh, something's up, to, well, today I still believe I belong-ish because I've got the family here, you know, and I've got these roots, and oh my gosh, in my 60s, I don't know if I can see myself living anywhere else. But I have to say, when we're traveling, I think I say I'm a Canadian. Like I don't say proudly, no, je viens de Quebec, connaissez le Quebec, da, da, da. No, I don't say that. At the same time, I don't know how many same times I'm saying, but I'm pretty, you know, when I think of Montreal, I think, wow, isn't this it's kind of a gift, no, that we're in this pretty interesting society where there is this joie de vivre, and you know, I've been singing, well, not lately, but singing in a choir where, you know, the choir director is careful to have English and French songs. I think, of course, you know, like it's just so neat, you know. But all that to say, when things like, you know, going to a hospital and seeing, you know, a sweet young doctor, but she's wearing a hijab, and I thought, oh my gosh, and so yeah, again, complicated.
Okay, we'll turn things around. What are some of the most difficult things you find about living in Quebec?
I think it's just recent news. I think knowing that there's now a Law 21, knowing that there's, you know, this Law 96, it's not clear to me, like, when this all comes out in the wash, what's this going to mean? You know, like, is it, you know, is it going to have really negative impact on our society in terms of, you know, people working, people studying? So that's the difficult part, the unknowns, you know, knowing that these legislations come in, and then whether, like, do we understand what, you know, what's going to happen with them, and you know, day to day. I mean, I know the CEGEPs, you know, you read in the papers that they're saying, okay, wait a minute, you know, you can't just do this fast, you know, we have to get things in line, and, you know, understand the implications of all these major changes. So yeah, it's a little tough.
Yeah, it is. Okay, in recent years, Quebec's Francophone majority has identified a number of linguistic and cultural threats. Which of these do you share and support, and which of these make you feel excluded or targeted?
Okay. I think there has to be a way of, you know, if our government is worried about the extent to which French is disappearing slowly, I'm not sure who the enemy is. Like, I think that the idea, I don't know, it just feels to me that, like, think about this a bit, you know, don't alienate long time Quebecers, don't make them fearful about, you know, going to a hospital and maybe not necessarily getting, you know, the services they need in their language, although I gather that's supposed to not be a problem. But it's just the, you know, saving one thing at the expense of upsetting another group of people that feels sort of passed by, you know. And you know, I remember, I guess, being part of a meeting where somebody said, you know, I just want to be part of this table. I want to be part of the table where they discuss all these things and where they figure out, because it's the idea that, like, who's deciding all these things, you know, and have they really kind of consulted and thought through it all? That's how I feel.
In very general terms, what do you think is the biggest problem facing Quebec today? And how do you think that any problem that you perceive could be resolved?
Well, I think my concern is that we are not welcoming enough in terms of new businesses coming to the province. so I think that's my concern, is that decisions made now are going to have implications in terms of attracting newcomers to Quebec, perhaps making yet more Anglos feel they need to leave. So these are my big issues, I think. And I mean, certainly, the Law 21, I think, day to day, knowing that, someone who wants to be a teacher probably needs to go somewhere else if they have any kind of religious symbols and things like that. You think, and yet there's this teacher shortage, so you think, how is this, how does this all make sense? Yes, that's my feelings.
Well, you've seen Guy Rogers' documentary, and he used this tool, which I'm going to use in the next question, very effectively. It's a great visual tool. So what I'd like you to do is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being weak and 10 being strong, indicate by a show of fingers how strongly you feel that the joys of living in Quebec outweigh the challenges.
Okay, I'm going to give it 8, and it's because, oops, you showed that one, and it's because of my family. I think it's my family that really anchors me to this province and their long history here, and therefore it makes me feel like I still belong.
Okay, is there anything else that you would like to add or say about your sense of identity or belonging in Quebec?
Yeah, I don't know if there's much more to add, really. I mean, I still, again, this whole feeling of, I think Quebecers, whether they're Anglos, Francophones, Allophones, I mean, one-on-one, they're great people, of course, and it's just, it's the politics, and it's, I think we're in a particularly fraught time right now, but I'm hoping things will kind of calm down a little, and that more optimism will come, because right now I get the impression Anglos are not feeling optimistic, and I'm hoping that maybe just through more discussions, seeing how things work through, maybe we'll get a greater sense of, okay, this is okay, we can all live with the way things are, or with some tweaks, but that's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. That was great. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.
So